It's a study session of the Littleton City Council, October 23rd. We have full council here. Our first topic is the Public Infrastructure Review Committee options. Keith, are you going to be on that presentation? Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. Keith Reister, Public Works Director. What we're actually here to spend a few minutes talking to you about is this is a discussion that's come out of several discussions, Mark and myself, City Manager, and talking about where we want to consider going as a community. We've got a great deal of spending that we do on infrastructure in this community, and if some other things fall into place, we could potentially have more funding. And also we're at a transformational time related to how we're going to go forward. And so the discussion that we've had is really related to how do we handle that as a community? And in communities that both Mark and I have been involved in this business, we've worked with whether it's transportation advisory boards, infrastructure, utility advisory boards, those kind of things, and citizen-based boards. And so we wanted to share a couple of ideas and a little background in this tonight. It's not necessarily something, we're not here for decision, but we're looking for feedback, ideas, those kind of things that we can then have further discussion about if we think this is a worthwhile path forward from a directional standpoint. So a little bit of background, if I can push the right button here. This is basically the question we're going to talk about tonight. Do we want to talk about having some citizen leadership support council related to infrastructure planning and those types of things in the community? Because we don't currently have that here. Why would we be taking that on? So, basically, as I said, we actually, our second biggest expense here, from a city perspective, we've got labor and we've got infrastructure investment. Those are our two biggest investments. City surveys, obviously, as you know, show infrastructure is associated with top issues, whether it's traffic or congestion or those kind of things. Our current customer base across all of our infrastructure platforms, even if we just take the sewer utility, our total reach of customers is over 250,000, which is, a little less than 5 times the city population. And then if we all look at the transportation of plenty of folks, as we know, we have no congestion and traffic problems here in the city, so that's really a non-issue. But we certainly get a lot of that kind of customer every day too. And so one of the other things is, as we've talked about, up until now, we haven't really done a lot of mid and long-term infrastructure planning in this committee that's really data and risk-based, and that's the platform place that we're moving to and that we've talked about. So that's why the timing of this is part of the discussion. As I touched on, earlier this year, this is kind of the game plan that we're working on within Public Works and within our utilities about, clearly strategic planning based on asset assessment, best of class techniques, planning, good consultants to help us, continuing education and leadership for our team, all the toolboxes available to deliver projects, really having best-in-class contractors and holding everyone to great performance standards, neighborhood engagement, public engagement, those kind of things, as well as some really strong design standards and resiliency, communications, technology, bringing all that to bear. And this is important, the technology piece especially, because we've talked about the situation, for example, very few of our signals are connected together these days, and one of the greatest opportunities as we look at traffic and congestion is really related to the utilization of technology to help us kind of get a little more space in our situation out there. The timing of this and why we talked about it is really driven by, we have, over the course of this year, we're in the process of really doing a lot of data collection We showed you a lot of, sewer video recently. And, Jerry got very excited about that.
I liked it too.
Okay, good.
Especially the brick stuff.
That's right. Well, if you're certainly interested in going out and looking at it again, we got a lot more. So we actually are about 75% of the way through that project at the moment. We're also doing a similar kind of assessment right at this moment for stormwater. We have a project underway to do that within facilities right now. We're going to be looking at every square foot that we have under roof here, barring fire stations, so we're not going to spend time on those for the time being. And our goal is to really have the same kind of level and data that we're talking about in those other areas. What do we have? How does that compare to maintenance schedules? That is something we currently don't have as well. And we're already down that path in the fleet area related to our fleet needs and our fleet infrastructure. As we move into the next couple of years after that, we're going to be doing the same thing with an enhanced level within streets, traffic, and grounds. We're excited about, from a technology standpoint, even 5 years ago, aerial data collection was still an evolving technology to the level of detail that you would like. Now we can actually, in our joint aerial projects, get layers of data down to, street markings, pervious versus impervious surfaces on properties, all those kind of things. And we're starting to bring that into our assets and our GIS platform so we can really bring that into the decision-making process. As we move forward into 2019, we are going to really be driving into that data, doing risk analysis around that. We've already, as you know, we are in the process of finalizing our consultant for the Transportation Master Plan. Out of the derivative work that'll come out of the sewer and stormwater data is master planning there. Facilities master plan will be hopefully done by early spring is our goal, late spring. And then the fleet master plan is something we're continuously working on. And beyond that, we've talked about the fact that in late 19 and 2020, we're going to be talking about sewer and stormwater rate studies and how that impacts our customers, our billing models, and a methodology that we like. And those kind of things. So we have a lot of convergence of information, decision-making, future planning, and the potential for increased funding at the same time. And so it's imperative that we have, from a staff perspective, we can certainly make a lot of those decisions and then bring them to you. Part of what we're talking about is, does council want to have a group that specializes in these type of issues with certain levels of experience and knowledge to assist staff in that process, to help that vetting process, so that by the time it gets to this group, there's been some of that vetting, there's been that community engagement, there's been that outreach, so that we're filtering some of that on an ongoing basis. You kind of do that at some level of planning commission and some of the other boards and commissions, and that's really, the discussion is, do you want that level of advisory service to council that works with staff, that takes guidance from city council to help translate the strategic goals and initiatives of council along with where staff is working to bring that together, help us vet things from a priority standpoint, feedback, and that kind of stuff. In your packet, I included just a handout with some sample charters, 1 or 2 sentence charters from other communities kind of up and down the front range. They're all about the same thing, advise city council on, infrastructure and what's going on. The one thing I do want to point out is that I'm really, Mark and I talked about this again today, is that we've talked about sort of this infrastructure question. And one of the things that we've sort of observed is and this is also my own professional experience, I've never really seen a situation where the utility grouping is in the same place as transportation. My experience is the people that are attracted to those two areas from a community volunteer standpoint have some overlap, but they have a little bit more passion for one or the other. And so that's kind of one of the questions. The other thing is that in the utility side, many communities, that is more than an advisory board. That is your primary board that guides the process of rate setting. They're more involved in the details of that. How does that work? What do we look like over 3, 4, 5 years? That's very common in cities with utilities. I mean, Englewood has a utility board. Most of the examples that are in there, when I put several examples, a lot of those also have water and or power in their portfolio. So you're talking about a much bigger portfolio of work than our two utilities here, which is sewer and stormwater. But as we talked about, we're talking about 250,000 customers there for specifically sewer, 50 or 60,000 for stormwater. So what we decided to do was, and this is a little bit, if you spent time in our office over there, you'd understand that one of our philosophies is let's just get something out there and talk about it and see where it goes in the discussion from there. And so what we just kind of did was I put together a slide to just kind of throw some different ideas out there. When I've talked to a lot of other jurisdictions, what we see is typically 7 to 9 members. They kind of, if we just went with transportation, usually you try and get some folks in there that have a specialty in, maybe it's multimodal, bikes and peds, somebody that's really interested in the transit side, somebody that's interested in the bigger sort of road side, those kind of things. And then there's the whole discussion about whether you want something like this to be an ad hoc committee. So let's say that council has a vision of taking a ballot item in the future, and they really want to tie it to infrastructure. Do you want this to be an ad hoc citizen committee that provides guidance to council on how that might look, what kind of projects would be included, and those kind of things, versus a long-standing committee? There's also the question of, I put some examples in there. Some of the big things that we're going to have to wrestle with coming up are disability and ADA plans. I didn't even put that on the list, but we completed those assessments this year, and we will be going through the process of figuring out what that looks like going forward. We did basically facilities and we did infrastructure. Our current, I think I mentioned this before, we currently have about 4,000 locations in city infrastructure which are currently non-compliant. And so we've got to figure out how to build a transition plan in for that, so that we have that in place as we work forward on our own infrastructure projects, as well as things like major public facility design. When we were talking about the budget, I brought up the issue of the library. There's a big difference between figuring out what you're going to do from a design perspective with, say, the Bellevue Public Works campus versus what you're going to do with the library. The library is going to require just a much higher level of public engagement. You got to have that, part of that also is fundraising. Something like a library, there's a lot of other opportunities for funding beyond just the city itself. Maybe not so much for a public works facility. So, coming up with that, I just wish that public works facilities were that sexy and exciting, but they just aren't, So, in that kind of situation and how you merge all that decision making, what does a library look like in 20 years versus the people that are, hardcore bibliophiles, for example, and want to see a library full of books versus technology. So those kind of things as well as one of the things that I think is important is financing. Because, the ballot initiatives that you see out in front of you right now, like Prop 110, is about revenue anticipation bonds. Do you choose to bond based on future revenue and then pay it back? Those are important decisions. They take a lot of time and work to work through. You have to have partnership with finance and all those things. So those are the kind of topics that would be involved with that. The other thing that I put as a bullet point down there, this is a particular provision in my experience that I used in another city for transportation. They had a 9-member board, and as part of the designation of that board, we asked City Council to have 2 members of the board that weren't necessarily residents, but they had a business in the community and may have an important transportation angle to it. Maybe they're a large trucking company, they're a big interest or something like that, a large distributor, but their ownership doesn't, the person that owns that firm doesn't necessarily live in town. And if there's anything that we do that has the influence of a regional perspective, transportation is it. And so that's kind of a dynamic to potentially think about to bring some of that regional nature to the discussion versus just sort of the parochial nature of the boundaries of a city itself. So that's just another kind of example of the kind of things that you can do. And so really with that, the only things that we have from a staff perspective we're concerned about are, timeline, obviously there's additional workload, 9 or 10, 7 additional citizens to talk to every month and plan for. We know they never call us or any of those kind of things, so, it's like preparing for any board or commission. Timeline-wise, as you saw, the reason I showed those timelines earlier is because, we're going to be getting to a point in the spring where we have data to really start talking about. Right now, we're still in a little bit of a void on that as we continue to ramp up, as we select the asset platform and those kind of things. So that's just kind of some of the other things. And so really I raised that last question, which is regulatory versus advisory. And that's sort of that utility question, is do you want to have someone that has regulatory authority to be a rate setting arm of city council? And there's a lot of different ways to do that, but that's something to consider as well in the process. And with that, I'm back to the first question, which was, we just want to come in here and share some ideas. This is an approach that council's interested in. This is a big topic, a lot of spending, and I know one of the things that we've talked about with you collectively is how do we engage the community and where we're going and what we're doing. And so that's why we wanted to bring this discussion to you tonight and see where council kind of had some ideas.
Okay.
2 questions. First, is this something that staff wants and sees as beneficial, or is this something that is just another layer that's going to push things back and make it take longer to get done?
Well,
Can I add to your question too?
Sure.
'Cause that was, and how much staff time is this going to take to support this kind of effort?
well, obviously, the first question, I'll go to your question is, in my experience, I have found having advisory boards, especially in transportation, is important. Part of that is understanding, let's say you're trying to make a decision on your strategy to spend $5 million. And how do you have to juggle some of those competing interests, whether it's multimodal. How does that come out of what the vision has been set? And some of that is important. And having that mix of interest and focus, like, the multimodal versus the transit versus the road person, is a great dynamic. So from a staff perspective, over the years, I've found that to be very helpful, especially when you're starting to do things like transportation master plans or those kind of things. When you're trying to talk to somebody about level of service standards in an intersection, that's not something you just want to wander in and have a one-meeting discussion about. And people's brains will be like, no, I don't want to do this anymore. So usually you got them hooked by that. They've committed for a couple of years, so you can torture them for more than 1 meeting. Is usually what happens. So to me, that's the case. I don't really think that there's, in an advisory board role, we're anticipating ahead of time. So it's not like I don't see a situation where we would say this has got to go to transportation board before it comes here. Maybe the budget review every year, those things, and we would just build that into the timeline and process. The regulatory side, if you do something with like utilities, that's kind of a different beast, because they would have to go through the public hearing process and those kind of things. Steve can enunciate on that if he wants to, but that's kind of the situation there. So I have found positive support in that. Staff time-wise, in the beginning, obviously there's going to be more ramp-up time as we sort of set the framework and those kind of things. In my experience, what usually you get to is a situation where your administrative team is supporting the documentation and the materials. You're figuring out what you want to cover from an agenda standpoint between the transportation chair and the director typically, and set your agenda month to month. And hopefully we've got enough data and planning in place that culling information is not that challenging for us, which is the space we want to get to anyway. So that's my take on it. I would suggest probably, Jerry, between, say, myself, the chief engineer, and our administrative team, maybe at most 4 hours a month, other than outside of the meeting itself.
4 total man hours?
That's what I would suggest once the committee's up and running.
Carol?
It sounds like an excellent idea to me to get more input and to do more engagement of the community in official ways. In the umbrella of more points of view often leads to better decisions. And I don't know much about this yet, but it seems like it would make sense to have a separate group for transportation and for utilities, because they aren't very much alike.
They are in our mind because they all come through the same door. I understand that. So,
Karina?
I'm also in support of this for those same reasons. But I would like to first focus on transportation. That is one that, we have already heard from the citizens that this is an important factor for them. We're putting a lot of investment there. We're doing a transportation plan, et cetera. So I would at least, call it walk before we run. I'd like us to consider transportation first. And then the second point that I do want to make sure that we make as you begin to structure this is it's very important that, for example, a transportation board is working with planning. Because as we may change zoning or development, one impacts the other. So that's something that always comes up in planning, and maybe the depth or expertise may not be in our planning board, so this is, I think, a great compliment. So.
Yeah, so I'm probably the lone voice here. I'd like us, in part, to parcel this out a little bit differently. We have a library board. If anybody knows library needs, it would seem to me we ought to use the people we've already appointed for that.
oh, I'm not saying we would take this just because we have facilities.
So I'm just parsing this a bit. So that would be the one thing. The same might be true for the museum. Do we have needs there? And we have RTD that we pay enough money, the citizens and so forth. So that they ought to be doing, and if they're not, they ought to be addressing more some of our needs there, which is not everything in the city, because some of the stuff is not them. I mean, a lot of the stuff is not them. So I'd like a little more revisiting of how we might parcel out certain kinds of things and then see what's left over. My own feeling is council has quite often had nothing to do at study sessions, or not very much to do. And it would seem to me we get elected to do some of this heavy-duty stuff. So I'd like to revisit how we might allocate and then see what, and there probably something, is left over that then we would have to do differently. But finally, minority of one, and it doesn't matter, so.
I second what Carol and Corinne had said. Also, how have the other cities handled it? I saw the comments, not handle it, but how's it been received by not only council, but also by citizens? Do the citizens even know it exists? Does that council, do they handle complaints, when snow's getting removed, or is that still coming through your group?
No, that all comes through us. It's really, if we want to send complaints somewhere else, I'm more than happy to get them going there in the first place, but it's not going to snow this year, so it's not a problem. So, it's going to snow everywhere except between the curb lines.
Excellent
That's what it's going
planning.
to do. That's what it's going to do.
Grass only.
That's right, exactly. So, related to that, it's interesting because in my experience over the years, there's some jurisdictions I've seen where the direction to create a board like this comes from council. They say, this is something that, we're going to be spending money, we're going to go get a bond or something, so let's create this. I've seen other places where it's been citizen generated, where, say, they don't feel like enough money is being spent on, say, transportation, and so they come to council and say, we need to do something to really create an advocacy and a forum for this as well. And so to me, I've seen both ways. My experience, one of my observations here, being relatively new, is I'm honestly surprised of the actual low number of boards and commissions that are here. I've been in cities where there's been as many as 30, in cities that aren't much bigger than this. Everything from senior advisory to youth to disability advisory commission, library.
Or government necessarily better.
All those kind of things. Well, those are all engaged citizens. So, but the good part about those situations is, and like, you mentioned, Peggy, is, facilities is kind of a different animal. versus something else, and I just listed it in there. But that's where, if we're gonna do some transportation, it's engagement with planning commission. You plan at least a couple times a year where those two groups are getting together, where the utility group's gonna come together and talk about stormwater and sewer and how they all fit together. The challenge, in my experience with councils that have a lot of boards is, every board wants to come and spend time with you at some point during the year, which will certainly fill up your study sessions. So, in my experience, that's been the case. And as you know, sometimes the council listens to their advice of their board, and sometimes they don't. And that's the prerogative of council, is the ultimate decision makers, and whatever happens.
Jerry?
So I agree with, I think maybe just transportation starting there, because that's a hot topic for us right now. But what about board versus commission and judicial, all that stuff?
This would not be a quasi-judicial. This would be simply an administrative, it would act in an administrative capacity. In theory, I suppose we could give it some power to recommend ordinances and things to you in the transportation area, but it'd be primarily administrative.
So is it appropriate to call it board versus commission?
You can call it board. In most cities, they would call it like a capital infrastructure board or a transportation advisory board or a transportation utilities board. So board usually is the term that's used.
So, and you're thinking how often they would meet a month?
In my experience, they typically meet once a month.
Okay.
Has been what I've seen, unless you got something really intense. Like, I know that we're going to end up with some kind of citizen group related to the transportation master plan. It's just going to happen as we go through it.
So they really focus in on things like the planning commission focuses on things. So that's really their specialty is that's what they're going to do.
Yep, it's that how do bike and pedestrian planning fit into the other transportation modes? If we've got a corridor, where do we sift through priorities about how we do that? So that's where you can get some of that great feedback and advice to you.
And I think I'd be in favor of transportation to start with.
Well, I think it's a great idea. I also think there's a lot of this that isn't really fleshed out.
Right.
Obviously, we're going to have to do some more work on it. I think transportation, clearly, but I also do think that a utility group is important with the issues that are coming down the pike with the sewer treatment, with stormwater. The sooner we could, I don't know that there's the same urgency for transportation, but there's definitely the need, and there's a lot of ramp-up time for knowledge and stuff on any of these things. And so, and I think, I like what you were talking about with the disability and the ADA transition plans. Part of the reason that hasn't been done is just that we don't have the bandwidth to do that. But yet we know it has to be done. And so this is the type of thing where citizen boards can really help. We had a citizen board that worked with us on the budget, a citizen board that worked with us on the charter, different things like that. And it's really, it definitely is, I think from a council perspective, having that board come back with the recommendations, it just helps you make better decisions. And I like that it kind of gets cleared through a different set of people, not staff and not council. And so a couple things though. I think the sooner we can put these together, the better. Right, the sooner the better, but without rushing and doing it wrong. So I'm wondering if it would be a good idea to perhaps have a couple of council members volunteer to break off and work with Steve and staff and whoever on what this could look like, what a transportation would look like, what would be what type of qualifications for people, what would they study, what would they look at, vet it out, drill down deeper and bring that back to council so that then there can be a discussion and then move forward, as opposed to bringing it back to the whole council to flesh it around. Council, what do you think about doing something like that? We've done that before, just break off a couple of us and with the blessing of the rest of council, stay engaged. Okay, so now we need volunteers.
Jerry will do it.
I'll do transportation, yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Karina?
I'll do it, Jerry.
Okay. Everybody okay with Jerry and Karina? Anybody else want to do anything with? Okay.
Just be my candidate.
So having the two keeps us from having to do a constant posting if you guys have to, you know, we're not trying to not have a public meeting, but it can become. Hi.
Trying to find where the police station is.
Oh.
Missing persons.
Okay, so Keith?
Yep,
I'll
that's
leave that
right.
in your capable hands to Karina.
One additional ask, or this may be something we can bring forward. We are going to have our applications for boards and commissions coming up. So I would really like us to be able to add this within this next kind of round.
Yeah, we would need to have we didn't need to have the clear requirements for that job, because I think Wendy posts those the first week or so in January, and then all the applications would come in and we interview in February. The timing would be good for you because they don't start work until April
The
1st.
the timing of that also works well, from my perspective, for the transportation master plan.
Yeah.
Because that would give us a group to engage with on the master plan as we go forward. And they're going to have, obviously there's going to be a lot of transportation discussion there, and people that are passionate about it, I think would be, that's something that we want there.
Carol?
I would like to caution not to get too hung up on the technical aspect of engineering, because that will limit us to a certain type of person, which is good to have some of, but not all of. And it also makes it heavily, almost maybe 100% male. And so the males are great, but 100% is sometimes a limited perspective.
I'm all for women in my life.
You like women?
And I did like Keith's idea about non-resident but businesses, because I think that particularly with the transportation, that's huge. I mean, Republic National just comes to mind right away, so. Okay, that's great. Anything else?
No, we'll loop back I'll get with Jerry and Karina and Mark and I, and we'll kind of get things going. Appreciate your
Excellent.
feedback.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Why the old-fashioned tricycle?
I was looking for we started our transportation planning here in Littleton.
Oh, it's transportation, got it.
I have a couple of employees that just retired that probably plowed snow with one.
I'm laid on the front of that.
So thank you very much, appreciate it.
Thank you.
That was horrible.
Okay, item number 2 for the evening is the short-term rentals. And we have Jocelyn and Community Development Director Jocelyn Mills and City Attorney Steve Kemp. Steve, you want to clearly outline what your expectation, what you need from council this evening?
Yes, and I think what we're going to do is have Jocelyn sort of introduce this, outline that, and then I'm going to get into some of the details, and then we will take questions and come to the end.
Sorry, guys.
There's a baseball game on tonight. We're going to be losing our crowd real quick.
Gosh, I even went to a training about this afternoon, and it was on this screen, sorry.
You made me come get you.
I mean, yeah, perfect.
Do you want to present her?
job, Tyler.
Great.
Thanks, Tyler.
Thank you, Tyler. Appreciate that. And as Steve mentioned, the purpose of the meeting tonight is to provide guidance for short-term rentals so that we can draft a code and bring that forward to you formally. And quickly, this is the outline of the evening. I'll quickly go over background, then we're going to review the concepts and go one by one through those objectives and get direction from you. And then at the end, hopefully then you give us the direction on what you want us to do next. Quickly on the background, and not to highlight the entire staff reports, but a couple things that are in here. Remember, starting in July, we had a study session. You gave us some policy direction around that, and then in August we came back and had more details around specifics of a code and how you wanted to create a draft around ownership and where we could have short-term rentals, the length of the time in which they could be rented, and then building code requirements around occupancy, things like that. Then we did put it out for the community to provide comment in early September through the 18th. Planning Commission did look at it on September 24th formally. At that meeting, they had a lot of questions, so they ended up doing a continuance. That then did require council, as you guys know, to extend the moratorium into January. In the staff communication this evening, we did attach all of the public comments that we received at both of the Planning Commission meetings, so you have that information for background. The other piece that is also in there is we did do a review of adjacent jurisdictions and those comparisons for you, so you have that information as well. I'm not going to go over that in detail right now, but just to point that out, so if you have any questions for us moving forward. And with that, we will dive right into it unless Steve has anything he wants to add about council.
No, I mean, as you know, the Planning Commission did make recommendations. When the Planning Commission makes recommendations to you on a text amendment, it's not like a zoning case where they're recommending formal action. They're simply giving you their thoughts on the text amendment that council can consider and choose to give whatever weight it so chooses. And so as a result of all that, we did look at text amendments. We did have some comments from council members as well, and we've looked at that. And we're now back to you to really get some, what I would view as final follow-up, so then we can draft an ordinance. And the goal would be to bring that ordinance to you for first and second read. And so with that,
Okay, so yeah.
as we recall, we talked about the importance of having a formalized process. And I think council's consensus was that on the annual permitting process, and we would include all types of residential short-term rentals. One of the issues I have had some questions from council members, and it came up at the Planning Commission meeting. Right now, the staff recommendation has been that all licensees would have to become compliant by January 1 of 2020. That would allow existing licensees to have the remainder of this year and all of next year. Their existing license would be in place, but they would have to meet the new requirements by January 1, 2020. Now, certainly that's a policy call for council. If council wanted to extend that deadline or make it shorter, that's council's prerogative. Okay.
I have a question on the recommended fees, $25. But in there, we have anywhere from $25 in Denver to, was it somewhere was $750. I mean, why is there such a huge difference in there, and why are we starting at the
Why
bottom?
are we so low? That's a great question. The reason is that under Colorado law, fees become a tax if they exceed the cost of service, and they require table approval. Right now, because we've never had these evaluated by a cost of service study, we wanted to pick a number that we were confident did not represent and expose us to any risk of a claim of a tax. I know that the city is proceeding with a cost of service study, and we're going to be further proceeding with that, and this would be certainly one of the fees that we would look at. But right now, we simply don't have that information to where I can tell you confidently if the fee was $100 that we're not taxing versus charging the cost for a service. Once we have that cost of service study, we'll be able to do that. And I think the intent would be that as we proceed with the cost of service study, and I don't want to speak for the city manager here, but we would be bringing back those fees and making recommendations to you.
When is that?
I don't have the answer to that. I think I'd have to come back and let council know. I know we concluded one part of that, and we were looking at extending it to cover another set of fees. So I'd have to come back and share that with you.
Yeah, I'm hesitant to start at the bottom. Just like with impact fees, we're at the bottom of everybody's. So I'm just a little concerned about starting so low. When $25 doesn't even cover one person's an hour of time.
And Mayor Pro Tem, members of the council, I think you could certainly raise it up a bit. I would just caution you, because we don't have any evidence of what the cost of service is. From a lawyer standpoint, I'm really, really reluctant to expose us to a table claim. And I think because this has been a high priority of the council, you've said to the staff you want us to look at cost of service, we're going to do that, and I think we'll have to you in a reasonable time a much more defensible fee. My concern is I'm just concerned about doing a higher fee right now and exposing us.
But again, the range was from 25 to 750 and everywhere in between.
Many of those cities have done cost of service studies so they could actually defend their fees against the table claim.
Can we call them up and say, hey, how long does it take to process?
We can send, if the council wants us to look at a higher fee, I'm happy to work with the staff to do that. I'm just the reason we made these recommendations is that we knew we were doing the cost of service study, and from a standpoint, I don't think it's in the city's risk to expose us to a possible table claim if we were too high.
Mark and then Carol and then
Council, I think if one alternative here is we could, as staff here, we've recommended these fees, and I'm confident we could accelerate and make this a priority here for the cost of service study to kind of evaluate this. Depending on your final outcome, we need to understand how far you want to take this here, but then we could push forward with the cost of service for this specific issue. So the first quarter of next year, we certainly could have an answer for you.
Carol.
The concern I have under fiscal impacts, it says there may be modest amount of revenue, but it doesn't mention any costs. And so it seems like we could get ourselves in a situation where we can't feel justified to enforce problems because we don't have the money to do it if it costs extra time of police or code officers or however it's enforced. Mark, is that a bogus concern on my part?
Yeah, I don't think initially
that would actually, no.
Yeah, I don't think I'd worry about that personally. I think, again, we can, as staff, we can commit to getting the cost of service study complete for this specific function here as quickly as we can. Then allows you to kind of update the fee schedule through an ordinance process shortly thereafter. So I don't think there's necessarily a problem in kind of revenue per se. I think this will probably be something that will ramp up and be probably manageable is my guess.
Karina?
An approach that we may want to consider, and I ask you to look into, is that in lieu of a business license, because right now we don't charge fees for any business licenses, to keep that as consistent as possible until we address it as a whole, remove the fee from the business license and look at truly the operator's license fee to determine. We probably know 25 is too low. As Jerry said, that's 1 hour of someone's time. And again, we do have some information. For example, we charge $70 for home occupation. So we probably have some data that can give us some level of confidence that it's still nominal and wouldn't necessarily subject us to that risk. So I'd ask that we strike it from the business license until we truly do an analysis, and then maybe focus on the operating license going up.
Seems reasonable to me.
Question though, our code for sales tax collection, is it not required a business license for that purpose?
It does require a business license. The other thing that we would recommend to council here is the current business license in our code is a perpetual business license, which makes it very, very difficult to regulate and revoke for misconduct. So we were recommending as part of this that with this particular license, and then possibly if council determine other licenses in the future, we move to what most cities do, which is an annual business license. So we have more control over that.
Let me clarify, I wasn't saying remove the business license, still get a business license. I was just saying remove the fee from the business
Okay.
license.
Since no other businesses,
Correct.
licenses have a fee.
Okay, I understand that.
Carol?
Are you proposing that we have a fee for the business license so that it can be renewed each year? Because we talked about that a little bit the last time we had this subject.
One of the reasons for the fee is because each year we would have a new business license application that we would process. When we get those, even on a renewal, we verify that there has been zoning and building code compliance, and we verify that they are in good standing with the Secretary of
Hold on a
State, those
second.
kinds of things.
You're going a little different than I had in mind. Right now, we don't have a fee for a business license.
We don't have a fee.
How are we going to get a fee for a business license? How's that going to happen?
For other licenses?
Yeah.
Yeah, for other licenses.
Are we going to do them all? Are we going to?
Well, I think we would,
What's this one?
I think at some point we would want to come back to council in a study session and talk about that approach. We have some business licenses that actually require a fair amount of review. For example, bars, restaurants, liquor establishments, medical marijuana, and it may behoove the city to consider in the future that that class of business license should be an annual license and should have a fee. We've not had that discussion with you, and so I would be a little bit reticent saying exactly how we're going to do that, but if council wants to have that discussion, I'll certainly work with the manager, and I'm sure we'll be back to you to talk about it.
Taking into account Karina's concern, I think, is your concern that we are talking about having a fee for this use but not for others. So to address that, do we address all others?
Yeah, I think if the council's just interested in simplifying the process, then sure, one option is that we do not charge a fee for the business license. We still require it. And then we just adjust the fee for the short-term rental operator license to something, say, like $45 or $50, to somehow cover the total cost of what we think might be. Even include, that total fee would include the finance department and how they might manage some of the business license itself.
Then we have the issue of having this one come up for review every year, which the attorneys seem to think was important.
Wouldn't the operator's license accomplish that? If they
That
don't
will
have an
also be-
operator's license,
That
they
would
can't
do
operate
it.
a-
Okay,
yeah.
got it. Yeah.
Okay, so on the annual permitting process, is everybody in agreement to, they need to get a business license, it will not be charged for one, and they need to get a short-term rental operator's license with a recommended fee of $45.
Or whatever the fee.
Or whatever, yeah.
But we have to come up with something.
Well, we don't know our
Maybe it
cost
will be
yet.
adjusted.
Yeah, well,
It
I
will be
think,
adjusted, we have to start somewhere though.
yeah, if you don't mind, maybe let staff kind of confirm that there, but it's, my guess it's probably going to be on the magnitude of about $45 to $50.
Make it as big as possible.
Yeah.
With the understanding that we're expediting the study and should have a better number by the first of the year. Okay, we're good on that one.
And council, is council comfortable with the grandfather date of January 1, 2020?
Karina? Go ahead, Karina.
I'm not comfortable with that. I think it should be longer. We currently have 9 licensee holders, and I believe none of which have generated a complaint of any sort. And again, not knowing, kind of where this is going to land at the end. For someone to change maybe their ownership or use of something like a home within 2 years in a real estate market that is unpredictable could affect them. So I would say this needs to be extended.
Peggy?
I'm not following why we want to give, if people are doing this, why we want to let them have a free rent for over a year. Am I misunderstanding?
It's not a free run.
They're not free, they already have a permit.
No, but they must be compliant. Why shouldn't they become compliant? How long does it,
19.
how long does it take you to get compliant?
Kyle and then Carol.
I was gonna say, I'm fine with, initially, I'm fine with this date for 1 year, depending on some of the other recommendations moving forward with other options. You know, for someone that has a license, I think 1 year is, I mean, they already are in compliance for having the permit.
Well, we're going to change
Right.
what compliant potentially means.
Carol?
There are two different licenses here. It seems like they ought to be able to get, there's no reason why they couldn't get the business license immediately, because there's absolutely no requirements other than applying for it. No costs now, and you don't have to do anything except apply for it, right?
Yes, I mean, these all have business licenses. So what would happen based on this, the current business licenses would expire on December 31st, 2019, and they would simply make application before they expire for a new business license. That would be a 1-year business license starting on January.
Do they have them now, the ones that would be grandfathered?
The 9 who are in existence are currently licensed.
Okay.
And then they would be required to get the short-term
They'd have-
operator's license at that point in time to come in.
What I'm going to suggest we do is the third bullet, that we park that in terms of getting an answer, because we haven't talked about what, to Peggy's point, we haven't talked about the compliances that we're going to be asking. They're all new. Most of them are new. So we'll park that and then come back to it.
So, moving on to the next objective, which we discussed with council, was to maintain the community character. And the current proposal allows short-term rentals in all zoning districts. Now, it did come up at the planning commission that some of the planning commissioners thought that perhaps the large lot residential districts are not appropriate for short-term rentals. So the question I would pose to council is, are you comfortable in allowing these in all residential zoning districts? And as you can see on the slide, the second question is, and this was the direction of council at the prior meeting.
Steve, let's just go one at a time.
Okay.
Kyle?
With the first one, are long-term rentals required, or allowed in all zoning districts?
What's your opinion?
Are long-term rentals allowed in all zoning
No,
districts?
because long-term rentals would, except of a single-family home that continues to be used for a single-family use, that would be allowed. There's no restriction on that kind of rental.
That's what, yeah.
Yeah.
So there's no restriction on that?
There's no restriction.
Okay, that's my point, yes, so then I'm good with it being allowed in all zones, because there's.
Someone made a comment that, a citizen, that they're making an exemption for large houses smacks of classism. And if we went that direction, we certainly wouldn't want to word it that way. I would think it would.
You wouldn't want to word it that way?
Yeah, everybody has to put up with this except rich people. No.
But what was the reasoning behind that?
Well, I think this is.
Carol just said it.
What do you think it was?
I think some of the concern was that in the really large residential districts, that it fundamentally could change the nature of the neighborhood, because you will, and I'm not saying these are policy concerns that you can all draw different conclusions, but the concern that they had was it could fundamentally change the nature of the neighborhood from what it currently was.
I think there was
Versus a small
also a comment too about what that means is changing the neighborhood of, like, oftentimes they're larger lots, that's the zoning districts, right, in Littleton, and so that you generally have larger homes that then, really wanting to make sure that character was preserved versus party homes, I think was some of their reasoning too.
Brandon?
I had shared with both Steve and Jocelyn some thoughts on a land use table to kind of bridge this, I think we're trying to balance. It's really what it comes down to. And one approach that I may suggest here, coming back to one allowed in all zone districts with residential use, taking, for example, the recommendation from the planning board that it is permitted in some of the residential uses, in particular, those that may be closer to downtown or some other areas that may lend themselves to tourism, and to extend it so that we're not just saying it's okay here but not there. In some of those other residential areas, either make it a conditional use or an accessory. And that's where we can bring in the concept of primary residency. So where we add it as either conditional or accessory, and I'll let you guys work the technical side of that, of which approach is better, that condition could be as a primary residency, or accessory essentially means it's a secondary, it's not. So my recommendation is in the remaining residential that right now for Planning Commission is not allowed, I'm recommending that it's either a C or an A. To kind of say it is across all classes.
Carol, is there an area now where short-term rental type thing is not allowed? Specifically said that.
Not the only area, and I'm not aware of any in the city, but in theory it would not be allowed, would be if you had a PD zoning, a plan development zoning, where the use table that the developer negotiated specifically prevented it. If that was currently in the use table, then they would not be allowed there.
And that's your next question too, because that is a question.
It seems like if the concern with large houses is that it could be used as a party house, and I think I heard that, I know I did, that a problem with the larger houses with attorney, you were proposing, the first time we discussed this, that the maximum number of people be based on square footage. And so with the larger houses, you could definitely get to a party house because you could easily get to 20 people could be allowed for those larger houses. But if we made it a maximum number of people based on something else, can we base our maximum usage on something else besides square footage?
Councilmember, what I would recommend is a number of cities in their definition of family, they provide that unrelated individuals. A good example is Lakewood. Lakewood requires 400 square feet per unrelated individual. So if you had a 2,000 square foot house, the most people...
It's not big enough for these big...
Okay, the difficulty with trying to use other means, and the reason that cities don't generally use other means is we run afoul of the Federal Fair Housing Act. Because we can't consider, if we consider unrelated people differently from families, about the only thing we can uphold, get to do that is using the square footage test, which is why you see that across the board in zoning codes.
So I'm sorry, Karen, what would the square footage of one of those large houses typically be, Jocelyn?
That's a very good question.
5,000 square feet?
Sure. That's probably a...
Okay, I'm just going to do a little math here, 5,000 square feet. And let's say we wanted a maximum of 5 people staying in a house because of parking and noise and all of that. I saw that in some of this stuff. Can't we just give a number of, this is the maximum number of people that can stay?
The difficulty...
Not depending on the size of the house at all.
I think the difficulty there is that we would have to do that with each zoning district, and the concern I have is we're now for this one little use treating unrelated people differently than we treat unrelated people in all other contexts. And
I don't get that.
Well, the concern is under the Federal Fair Housing Act.
Well, I understand that part.
That's my concern is that if we had, say we only allowed 5 people in a house of 5 5,000 square feet. That essentially works out, even though we're not saying a square footage requirement, we are saying, okay, that's roughly 1,000 square foot per person. Now, if a house has 1,500 square feet, are we going to limit it to 3? And if we are, for all other purposes of family, we don't limit it to 3. So now, for this one little use, we are requiring 3 and limiting it to 3, where for other things we don't. And I guess that is, and maybe I'm not getting, am I not understanding council's concern? Because I see kind of everyone is.
Peggy and then Karina.
Yeah, so I have a question in terms of what homeowners associations and gated communities are allowed to do more stringent or less stringent than what we do.
Homeowners associations could prohibit this outright, and some do. They can impose in their CC&Rs an outright prohibition, and if you then engage in a short-term rental, they could fine you and place liens on your property.
Karina.
From what Carol's bringing up, different areas may have different concerns because of either the size of the house or what parking might be available, etc. So that is, again, another point that I'm making of where maybe a condition based on certain conditions gives that flexibility that in a particular neighborhood there may be some issues to address that are different than in other areas. So conditional use, I think, helps to give that level of flexibility.
Okay, Pat and Kyle and.
Yeah, I'm seeing on page 6 of the ordinance where the zoning that it does allow for, the one thing I would like to add in there, it says are permitted in the following districts, R2, R3, R3X, so on and so forth. I would like to eliminate R2.
We're going the opposite direction. We're allowed it in all of them.
I know. Well, according to this,
That was planning's recommendation.
I understand. I like the recommendation, except I'd add R2 to that. And I'm also, I think back to Carol's point, I know the reason for an Airbnb was really for somebody to rent out a room. And I think we've lost that as what the fundamental reason for Airbnb was. It was to rent out a room. And I think if there's a homeowner present, then they can use in their best judgment what's right for that house. In a larger home, they're not going to let 30 people live there for a big party. They're going to or rent for a big party. They're going to say, yeah, you can have family members here, but we're not having a big party in my house. So I'm definitely wanting to see that homeowner be on premise now.
Kyle.
Going back to the all zones, I think it should be allowed in all zones, so we don't say, large properties, large houses get an exemption versus, I live in R2, right across the street is R3, and there's really no difference between right across the street my neighborhood. And so I think, allowing within all zones is appropriate. What would require, and I'm not on board with being a conditional use either. I think it should be permitted use. If we consider conditional use, what level of restrictions does that apply? So each person would have to apply then to have that allowed, and then planning commission would have to approve it case-by-case basis. So one house in R1 might have it, and one house may not have it based on planning commission's approval. That doesn't seem like it's
What criteria did they use to
right.
make this?
So I think we either
It's all.
Carol.
And this chart that you attach here, an example is Durango. Where to go? Limited to 5 unrelated people on the property.
And that's correct. And most, a good example is Lakewood. Again, Lakewood limits, they have a square footage, but then they do have a maximum limit. And I think that is fine if you did square footage and a maximum
Oh,
limit. Maybe I didn't make that clear.
You did,
myself.
not to me,
Okay.
not at all, not at all.
I apologize for that. A maximum limit and square footage works because what happens is we're not judging based on family or any of those
No.
dynamics. We're simply saying you get this much square footage, doesn't matter whether you're a 10,000 square foot house or a 1,500 square foot house, you get this much square footage per person, and then, but no matter what, your maximum is this.
Okay.
And so I think the
Thank
next,
you.
and if the mayor, if it's agreeable, we'll move on to the next item, which is that we would limit short-term
Well,
rentals.
wait, we don't have a resolution on allowing it in all zone districts.
I'm for it.
I'm all for it.
I'm for it.
Okay, I'm for it.
Not in all districts.
Okay. Four of us say move that forward.
So the next would be to limit these to one short-term rental per applicant. So in essence, if I come in for a license, I can get one short-term rental license, and that's it. I can't have 2, 3, 4, 5, or whatever.
Is this the place though where we talk about whether they live in the house or not?
We'll get to that.
Not yet, not yet.
It's coming.
I don't have to be at work until the morning, so.
But if we deal with that one, whether they have to live in the house or not, then we don't need to deal with this one because a person's not going to have more than one primary residence if we go that direction. So this becomes a classic moot point.
But let's assume that it doesn't get voted that way. I'm good with one per applicant.
Peggy?
What if we have 3 applicants applying for
Same
houses
house.
3 in a row? I mean,
They will argue-
but they have a multi-property gang party.
That raises a very good gang party. Councilmember Cole raises a very interesting question, which is, some cities have had basically a concern about short-term rental neighborhoods because A has a house, they apply for a short-term rental license. Next door is B, they apply for a short-term rental license. And next door to B is C, and they apply for one, and you have 3 in a row.
It's a different issue, though.
I think it's also important to know that not everybody that rents short-term rentals, it isn't always a big party.
Right.
It rarely is.
It is rare.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's,
We need to solve the problem for the bigger picture as opposed to trying to solve the problem for a problem.
right.
Because we're gonna make a problem that way. Peggy?
But I do think we have to consider regulations, enforcements. I'm not into a disaster mode here.
That's a different issue than the one up there.
I know, but it's,
Could we table that one?
Parking lot.
Parking lot. Thank you.
I think we're going to come back to that one because
Like real soon.
We were parking on that, that's agreeable, Mayor.
Yeah. Kyle?
Yeah, I'm good with the one per applicant, and just figure out how to define applicant. And, you know, so you said someone can't have 3 different LLCs and have 3 different.
Or I can't rent your house and then
Well, they have, that's, we had in there as the fee owner, so yeah. But yeah, one per person, per.
We will park that until we discuss parking primary residence and then
Yes.
come back.
so we don't have a definition of applicant yet?
Well, applicant generally would be the person who would apply for the license. Now, what we noted here was, one of the conditions would be that that applicant must have a physical residence in Littleton. So that in essence, if I give
Wait, I gotta interrupt. You said generally the person applying would be the one for the license. I mean, generally? I mean,
Well, the reason is that I said that sometimes it's always in their names. But I mean, like, it's just like zoning cases. Sometimes a zoning case, a person might hire a lawyer who actually comes in and fills out the application, but it's in that person's name. And so that's what I mean by that is that I don't expect that will happen here. I think the applicant here will be the physical, actual applicant.
Or we can state that it needs to be.
We can certainly state that.
Remedy as surrogate.
I could see a case where, you know, mom and dad, daughter and son have primary residence in 2 homes, as two non-owner occupied, and they all, you know, they can turn all those into a Airbnb. You'd have all family
They have
members.
one primary residence
Well,
per person.
So I think if a husband and a wife each bought 2 separate houses and then applied and got 2, how we define applicant, so it's just one per that primary residence.
Well, let's talk about primary residence, because that would solve that problem.
We'll get to that, just,
My question hasn't been answered, though. Can an applicant, so my specific question is, can an applicant be a person, LLC, or trust?
right now in the law, a person includes not just natural people, which is us, but it would include an LLC, it would include a trust, and it would include a corporation. Partnerships are not natural people because partnerships are basically a mix, the 2 people combined together, and each one owns undivided interest. So it's basically LLC.
Corporations are people.
It's those 3.
LLC, trust, or corporation?
Yes. They all qualify under the law as people, generally, for purposes of property ownership. And in fact, many people have their houses. They may have either a regular corporation or a subchapter S corporation that actually owns their house. That's not an uncommon thing.
Would it be fair to say one of the mitigating factors from a corporation is that it could be owned by a corporation, but how would the corporation fulfill the Littleton resident criteria?
The corporation, depending on how this is written, the corporation might have to have its physical office in Littleton. So in essence, a corporation that's office in Denver could not do it because it would not have its physical office here in Littleton.
It's also not uncommon for apartment complex owners, corporation, to have, let's say, 4 apartment complexes, and each one is a separate entity.
Very common that each one will be a separate LLC because they want to keep the financing and the leasing all separate.
Carol?
We could spend the rest of the night tangled up in this. How about we move forward and deal with primary residency first, and then see where we are?
Can we get to that?
Yes, let's get to that.
You gotta keep
3 slides.
So we'll skip over it, but the thing is, we do need to, unfortunately, the PDs, we do need to talk
We
about
do
that.
need to come back.
We will come back to all of that, but it's worthless to discuss a bunch
That's
of
what
things that we
primary
can
residence.
totally change by. So let's get this one resolved. Primary residence.
Yes.
So the,
Peggy's in, yes.
yes, I was going to get this resolved. Please, I don't want to have to come back and do this again. So the question in terms of residence, and again, you'll see these done different places. Primary residence means that in some cities we'll have an actual time limit because primary residence is generally that place where you treat it as where you reside. The difficulty is, from a legal standpoint, there's no requirement that for it to be a primary residence, I don't have to reside in my house a certain number of months a year in order to register to vote. As long as I claim to indefinitely reside there, I may only reside there 3 months a year, but that's the place that I believe I reside indefinitely. And as far as the law is concerned, if that's where I believe I reside indefinitely, I am able to obtain the normal things like driver's licenses, voter registration, things. So so if we're going to define it as primary residence, I think you certainly need to have a requirement of you must actually live there a specific amount of time. If you don't, quite honestly, I would recommend not doing primary residence and doing something like application and restrictions, because the reality of it is that you could have a person who lives there 3 months a year and that's their primary residence.
Let's deal with these one at a time, in order.
Okay.
Although, what I just heard was it's not a primary or minimum, it's a primary and minimum.
Yes, and if you're gonna do primary, I think you have to do minimum. If you're just gonna do
that's what
primary
Goldman did.
without minimum, then I think essentially primary becomes an unworkable standard. Honestly, I don't know how we would enforce it.
And that's what Golden is doing. But the other examples do not.
The others don't, and enforcement becomes a problem for that very reason.
What do you propose for a minimum residence? 10 months?
I would say, honestly, I think 10 is probably on the extreme side, just because of the nature. People may leave for the summer. To me, if you look at the school year, for example, school year is a 9-month school year. I would suggest you may want to look at, say, 8, 9 would be the max, but look at a slightly lesser amount of time that reflects the fact that lots of people don't reside in houses year round.
Sure. Peggy?
So, a different way of coming at this, in a sense, because I'm thinking of people who sometimes have saved up all their vacation and then they, some places let you accumulate vacation, then you go on a long vacation. But the real issue is we want the darn owner to live and be there when it's being used this other way. We don't want the
That's
owner.
number
no.
3, that's point 3. Oh, no, sorry.
So I mean, you might
It could be.
You might rent a room or your basement or whatever, but you're occupying the house.
It's a separate issue.
That's a separate issue.
That's the owner occupied, which is a different
But
one.
I'm getting at where my prejudice is on the whole thing.
Let's take these one at a time.
Mayor, Council, I would suggest if you're going to look at primary and minimum, my suggestion would be that you look at no more than 8 months. I think that reflects the school year. It still ensures that you don't have a completely absentee owner, but it does reflect the fact that in today's world, lots of people travel quite a bit.
And council, let's keep in mind that this is going to come back to us in a public hearing, and so we're going to have a lot more input brought in. What we're asking staff to do tonight is bring back kind of what we've got a consensus on council. We do not need to argue this whole thing out tonight, okay? So I want to run.
Although, with all due respect, Debbie, I think this is where I'd rather take the time now. During the study session, we've gotten a lot of feedback already. That's exactly why we extended the moratorium. And I'd rather work through as much as we can now than me coming back with tons of amendments at a public hearing, or anybody else for that matter.
And that is not what the intent is. We're having good discussion. We're just not going to sit here for 3 hours and spin this thing into something that it shows up at our public hearing, and it starts to become something different. I think we need to. We've gone over this a number of times, and so I think we all have a fairly good idea of what we're talking about. Let's get our questions answered. Let's make sure we're clear about what we want to move forward. If there needs to be tons more discussion on this in order for it to get back to us at a public hearing, so be it. But I'm hoping it doesn't. I think we're closer than we think we are. Kyle?
Can we just quickly say briefly our opinions? Primary residence, I don't support. I would much rather applicant restrictions.
What?
The applicant restrictions, one per applicant.
I support primary residence, and I would say 8 months is a fair compromise.
Peggy?
We'll come back to you. Who else?
Yeah, I think I agree with what you just said. That's right.
Carol?
I agree with Pat. Primary residence, 8 months.
Jerry?
Primary 8.
Rena?
I would not support primary across all of the residential, across all the zones districts.
Okay. I'm good with primary 8.
Okay. And I think that takes care of the third one here, only resides in the city because.
And I think it's good to say that we're giving direction, not
Yeah.
decisions.
Yes.
No, we're
Right.
giving direction.
Yeah.
And then,
Bring back an ordinance.
the limit of the number of short-term rentals per person, that takes care of that. So if we can go back to the zoning stuff, item, we do have a couple questions we need you to provide direction on the zoning. Now, as we mentioned, the consensus was to allow it in all zoning districts. The issue really is the third one. What do we do with planned development districts? Because quite honestly, most of these districts, this was never contemplated in the list of uses. And so do we say, okay, because we never contemplated it, it's not in your list, you don't have it, and if you want to have short-term rentals in your planned development zonings, you need to come back in and amend your list of uses. Which is quite candidly what we would do with any other use. We would say, not in your list, can't do it until you come in and amend.
Carol?
How about if it's a PDR?
It would be,
All the PDs would be the same.
What would,
All of the planned development districts, whether it's a PDR or a PDI.
so
would be
they
the
all potentially allow some version of residential, so it
even
just
a
depends.
PDI? Oh,
same. Yes.
That's a different
Would that be
topic.
South Park?
Yes.
Got it.
If we said we allowed it all zone districts that with residential use, do we need to worry about the PDRs then?
Well, I think you do, because unlike the straight zoning districts, the way the PDR works, it's a customized list of uses. So we as staff really do need a little direction here. If you want us to simply say, well, we're going to interpret the code as it is, and because it allows residential use, this is automatically accessory to a residential use, we can do that. Or the alternative would be to simply say, no, it's not accessory to a residential use in a PD district. You need to go amend your use list.
What is the harm with including it?
No.
I don't think that this is truly a policy call. I don't think that there's a harm, because they're still going to have to get the license. They're still going to have to get the business license. It's just, this is not a call that we as staff can make.
Yeah, I guess that was, give us the pros and cons.
I think the pros is that if you require them to go get the use list, you don't have a situation in a PDR of one of these popping up and everybody saying, well, city, this isn't on the use list, why didn't you do something about it? Now, the con is, most of these PDRs in Littleton were done 20 years ago. No one ever contemplated this. No one ever thought about it. And frankly, in some PDRs, and South Park is an example, for them to change their use list, they have to get sign off from all their property owners. So you could end up with a neighborhood battle in a PDR.
And confusion, because there would be different rules depending on where you live in the city.
Are you recommending not?
I think either decision, this is one of these where,
It's a pro con?
so the pros would be, your list, if you require it, that you have to change the PDs and do an amendment. Everybody who lives in that PD knows what the rules are, because the list has been changed. Everybody knows, no one can come back and say on the city, well, we didn't know that this use was gonna be allowed here because it's been changed. The con is, most of our PD districts were done 20 years ago. This was never contemplated, and
Where was it contemplated 20 years ago?
No.
nowhere.
Exactly.
Carol?
When you say they would have to come and change the use, who is they?
The PDI, normally it's gonna be a property owners association like South Park. They are the inheritors from the developer of the PDI, so it would normally be the property owners association.
So the property owners association, mean the homeowners association?
Yes, and like South Park, it's the overall property owners.
The overall.
It's all of the
Well, like
associations.
South Park has two of them though.
But they have a master association, and it's usually that master association who would have to come in. They have minor associations.
Sorry for whistling.
All PDs have an association.
No, we have some PDs, this is where this gets kind of convoluted, because we have some PDs that were done, the master developer's long gone, the association died or whatever.
Can we can we just put some verbiage around it to say, if you're requesting for a license, that you have to have approval from your HOA in a plan development?
Karina?
So how about?
Wait, one more time?
Can we just put some verbiage around, putting it back on the plan, the PUD, and just say, if you're requesting a license, then you have to have the approval of your HOA?
Well, yeah, I'm thinking too, if we included the PDs.
It takes us out of the risk factor, I guess.
Yeah, we don't manage associations.
Right, and we basically put it back on the
Because any association can say no, in our
They can
neighborhood.
say no.
Yes.
Or they can say yes.
Yes.
Or yes.
Sure.
Mayor, Council, maybe a solution to this would be that we simply define this as accessory to any residential use in a PD, and we adopt what Councilmember Driscoll stated, which would be it's accessory, so from the city standpoint, it would be permitted, but subject to the HOA's approval. So from the city standpoint, it'd be accessory to the residential, but one of the requirements to get your license in a PD would be you'd have to show approval from your HOA.
Yes.
But then now, what about R1s where have HOAs?
The residential zoning districts, we would not treat that way because they have a set list of uses in the code. And all these straight zoning districts, we would have a line in the chart that is called short-term rentals, and it would say you have to then go to this section of the code to meet these requirements. This only is because of the unique nature of PDs. So if that's agreeable to council, that would be the approach I would recommend to you.
First Peggy and then Carol, and I've got a quick question on that though.
So
Do we have a definition for HOAs?
Yeah.
Because there are a lot of things out there that think they're HOAs.
No, we will put that, we can put a definition in the code, but basically what an HOA is.
Well, I know what it is, but we need it
We can
defined.
define it.
To a PD, because we don't want.
So I think this gets complicated. People don't know what the devil these things are. We can say all this stuff, but somebody who lives in wherever they live thinks something has happened.
Everybody doesn't have this giant map?
I mean, I know stuff, is out there, but the point is, with the different kinds of entities in the city, I think this is getting very complicated. I think the city ought to just say, we either allow it or we don't. We could potentially have an HOA say we want to opt out of it, and maybe we allow that and just say, we don't want any of our people to be able to do that. I'm not quite sure how we deal with that. But I think having different entities involved in ways that citizens, residents don't understand, and the entity might not understand, is too complicated. I think it ought to just be cut and dry.
Carol?
If an HOA has to give approval, who is the HOA? Do we know that? And how do they go about doing that?
It's made up of.
That is
Let me say the reason that I ask. I live in a voluntary HOA, and we are in a PD. So if somebody wants to get a license to do short-term rental, they would come to the city, and I think they would think they live in an R something if they ever even thought about it. So they come in and then they find they have to get approval of the HOA, and they don't know who the HOA is.
I would suggest in a situation like that, would be a number of signatures then, based on a percentage of the property owners.
Okay, there are 502 properties in.
So I would say anybody within 20 houses of you would need X percentage of those people. Because those are the ones that would be most effective.
Or you're not in an HOA. So you're in something that wants to call itself an HOA. So I think you have to have a definition. There needs to be a board. They need to have meetings. There needs to be money collected. There needs to be.
That's an HOA.
That's an HOA. I lived in a place that was the same way. that somebody made themselves the HOA president and yeah, who are you?
They
don't plan parties. Karina?
Okay. Can an HOA, no, actually, never mind. So a PD, at this point, I would recommend to not take a position on the PD, meaning in absence of the PD allowing or even subject to interpretation that would allow this, I would say we don't allow short-term rentals, at least not right now. And we come back to this one. Like there's just so many variations of what a PDR is, which one has an association. So we're starting to mix association and PD, and they are two very different things. It just so happens that a lot of associations may be in PDs, but we've also heard associations are in R1. So I'm hearing us debate associations, which are sometimes in a PD and sometimes out. So from a PD perspective, I don't think we know.
What is it you're proposing?
That we don't allow it in PDs now and table it until maybe 6 months from now. Table that particular.
I would say I take if we do that and PDs come asking to be in it, there's what, 20, 25 PDRs all over the city. We're gonna have to be doing this every single time. So I say we allow it, say it's in all residential zones, it's allowed. If you're in a PD and an HOA that doesn't want it, you can be more restrictive.
Put the burden on them.
Put the burden on them and say, in residential zones, you can do this. These are the restrictions we set for the entire city. Everyone's playing by the same rules. If you want to play by different rules, you got your little team there, and you do that.
I mean, Council, that was kind of where I was going.
That's where
What
we're
took you so
going.
long?
Everybody good?
We caught up to you, Steve.
All right, that's where we're going. Next.
We're good.
Nice to meet you, Kyle.
Now that
And
we're on to
Steve.
the next side.
Where'd you go?
You done with that? We're done with this. We would propose in this to basically adopt, instead of using the building code for the occupancy limits, we would propose to be like Lakewood, where we would have a minimum number of square foot per person with a maximum of 5 residents.
I think we all were okay with that. Karina?
I'm not.
No, we're not.
Okay, so if I'm hearing you correctly, you're gonna have a different occupancy limit for short-term rentals than you do for every other residential use.
No, Councilmember Elbad, what we propose to do is change the definition of family, so this limit would be the same for everything. It would be the same for across the board.
All right, so maybe my specific question is around the language that talks about 300 square feet per person. Does that apply to all residential as well as, so it's not just for short-term rentals?
Yeah, all residential, and that would be for unrelated people with a maximum of 5. So you, in essence, you have to have a minimum of 300 square feet, and there's a maximum of 5. Family related, there is no maximum, and you can't, so if you have 10 kids,
Just don't want Jan to be left behind when the Brady Bunch ends.
Just for short-term rental.
but that would be the definition for family, and it would apply across the board.
So it's 5 non-related people?
And 5 unrelated people.
Okay.
Or 16 family members approximately,
All right, let me ask
on a
this
5,000 square foot home.
So on page 2 of the ordinance, you have family defined, line 40. And I'll give an example. We just bought a home and it's 1,387 square feet. It's a 3-bedroom home. If I divide that by 300, I'm only allowed to have 4 people in that home, even though it's a 3-bedroom and it's actually designed for 6 people. Can I have 6 people in that 3-bedroom home?
And the answer is, under this definition, you would not be able to do that because you're required to have, and that,
What's the difference between related and
Yeah, that's
unrelated?
the
She can
difference.
have related in that.
Related, you can have as many, as long as you're.
It's the
related.
I
unrelated.
can't have 6 roommates.
What is a related?
Related is by either blood or marriage, or legal adoption. So, and by law, it also includes foster children. So, blood, marriage, legal adoption, foster children.
So can I have 3 married couples in there?
That'd be 3 unrelated.
3, no, 3
I'll say no.
separate
No, the
couples.
answer is no, because each of the married couples is a family. As a total, they are unrelated. So you could not have 3 married couples in your 1,387 square foot house.
A couple doesn't have to be married by law.
No, that's
They can call themselves a family.
That's a tangent.
It's not a tangent.
But
They can call themselves a
technically,
family.
and that's absolutely correct, Mayor Pro Tem. The thing in most of these definitions is that they use the term marriage, blood, adoption, and foster child simply to deal with the fact that we as a society do not believe that there should be any limits put on occupancy by people who are related. And the courts have generally upheld that and said you can treat that differently.
I have one more example. I'm just really trying to understand this. And some of this just comes from personal experience. So my family of 4 and my friends, my 2 friends.
Yes.
So that's 6 people again, because it's a 3-bedroom house. So it's my family of 4 and 2 friends are gonna join me. Can I do this?
No, your family of 4 would constitute a family, and there's no limits. But your family of 4 is not related to the other 2 people.
So you're gonna force me to always travel with my family? I mean, I love them, but my point is, I'm not okay with this, because I don't think this fits, again, if we're gonna talk about the intent and use of how short-term rentals are used, this is too limiting.
I mean,
I don't understand, Steve. So if Karina is staying in the house and she wants to rent it to a couple of people, she
That's not what
can.
you're saying. That's not what, you're not saying your house, you're renting a house.
But even in that scenario, she's correct. So if we're, remember, we made the decision that it's my primary residence, but when I leave for those 2 months, I'm going to rent it out, and at that point, it's saying I cannot rent it to a family of 4 and then 2 friends.
Right.
And I think that compromises the purpose of it.
I agree. I agree with you. I don't know what everyone else's uses of Airbnb, but I use them frequently. And we go out. It's like 3 couples rent a house, and it's there's 6 people there.
And not everybody's married.
Not everybody's married. I go with my family, my extended family.
I don't think we should define the relationships of the people who are renting.
And we can, Mayor, Council, the other alternative would be to simply leave this alone and just use the building code, the international building code, which the city has adopted for purposes of, it just says 150 square feet. It doesn't matter whether it's family or anything, it just says 150 square feet.
And then we say also a maximum of 5 persons for a short-term rental.
No, that's what I'm saying to.
We're not saying that?
I guess
Well,
that,
then we're back to the party house for the big houses.
It could have 4 bedrooms.
Well, we're not counting bedrooms.
But if you count bedrooms,
You get 4
fair
couples.
housing allows 2 per bedroom.
4 unrelated couples would not be allowed then, if they're just dating, but they're not, this idea of a party house is so extreme.
No.
Yes, in the general extent of how these things are used,
Debbie,
they're not party houses. Yes, it happens, but it's a off chance occurrence here. Mostly it's, a family with 3 or 4 kids saying, well, I could go rent 3 hotel rooms or a suite, or I could get a house where I have a kitchen and save money and do that. Or it's, couples that are saying, let's go experience Littleton for the weekend. The idea of renting a full house and having full-on parties is kind of on the outskirts there. And nothing stopping a owner-occupied person from having parties at their house anyways. We already have regulations for noise and parties. And so I think what we're doing is taking a very extreme, limited scope and expanding it beyond what it needs to be at. I understand that, but we don't want to have, 60 people coming over here at a house and all sleeping on the floor, but that's not, going to happen all the time, or very rarely.
this spring, I had 2 examples in my district of the party house. And it's extreme, but any others I didn't hear about. But I heard about the extremes because the neighbors were frustrated, extremely frustrated. The way it was different for them from a regular neighbor having a party, is if you have a regular neighbor who has a party and they overdo it, somebody calls the police come talk to them, and they don't do it again. But the first one I heard from was every weekend it was a party, big party. And so each weekend it was a fresh start with dealing with the people that are having the party. The second one was kind of the same thing. And the experience that both of those sets of people had, unfortunately, and I think the reason that we're where we are, a reason we're where we are now, is that when they called the non-emergency number, it's a Friday night, it's a Saturday night, or something like that, what they were told was your situation is not an emergency, and we will deal with it if we have time. And there was not time. Again and again, which is believable. I'm not arguing with that. But the fact was that these people were left with no way to address this recurring problem. So let's say there were 30 Airbnbs, and the outliers, like you said, I think you're absolutely right, were these. But these need to be dealt with some way, and we haven't had a way to deal with them other than the people living next door to this just
And
And if you have a code enforcement, you pull their license.
Karina and
that's
then Kyle.
an issue.
Karina, separate.
So I think your comment of dealing with it is exactly a valid point. I do not believe dealing with it is by limiting how many people. A party can happen with 4 people and it can happen with 10. Or, so I don't think a party is necessarily indicative of how many people are involved. And I fully support some implication to dealing with it. And I think whether that's a fine, you do it, once is your warning, twice is a fine, third, license revoked. So I think it's about solving for how we deal with it. I do not believe number of people in the home is the solution.
Right. And that's the point I was trying to make. I wasn't saying we don't deal with the whole short-term rental issue, because obviously we need to deal with it. It was the number of people dealing with party house. And I think there are other ways to more appropriately deal with that, to have the, infractions and say, if you get 3 times, it's done. We're not going to keep doing this every weekend.
Carol.
This may take us to enforcement of a sense calling the non-emergency police number didn't work, and that apparently is a big part of how we got here. Not blaming the police, just we didn't have anything in place then to deal with this. Do we have anything more in place to deal with it now? So we're talking about Friday night, Saturday night.
It could be any party for that matter. It could be any party for that matter.
It could be any party for that matter. A difference is that these 2 situations got into the recurring party. It isn't, somebody had a birthday and they had a party and it went too long and they won't do it again for a year or 2. It's every weekend.
That's a nuisance property. Don't we have issues to deal with nuisance properties?
Yes, we can deal, I believe, with the noise and the misuse of the property. What council might want to do here, I would suggest is, why don't we just leave it that the occupancy limit is as established in the building code, and then if we have an issue down the road, we can always come back. Now, under the building code, there's an occupancy limit of 150 square feet per person, and that applies across the board. And so we just leave it at that, which is what the current definition of family does, and we don't deal with this issue. And if in 6 months we as staff feel
I'm good.
Yep, I'm good too.
we can't deal with it, we'll be back here and
Well, and I
say,
agree with what Karina said, I think we need to have a policy in place that addresses a first-time offense, second-time offense, and third.
We will be getting to that.
Yeah, that's coming
what
up.
we really
Right now,
Coming up.
building code is good, works for me.
We're trying to move on.
Okay.
The only thing on the building code, you said it's 150
Square foot per person, yes.
per person, so that a 5,000 square foot house, that's 33 people.
Well, how about a number per bedroom?
So were we gonna do the max? Were we gonna max it
We
out?
can do the max, but then if we get to the max, we get into this whole question that council's been struggling with, which is the number, because we can't, dealing with the Federal Fair Housing Act, if we do the max, then we're defining it only as an unrelated group of people. So we get into kind of this issue of what happens if I have some unrelated, some related.
Why do we have to call them related or unrelated? They're renters.
For people?
No more than, more than 10 occupants, period.
Okay, well, you know what, we will go back and look at the short-term licensing. I get where you're coming from there, which is, let's do this outside of the definition of family, and we'll just do it as part of the licensing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Establish it as part of the licensing.
Were you thinking that all along?
We will defend that.
Okay, what are we moving on to?
Now let's move on. Because we do have a few more slides for you.
So what did we just,
I got. I don't know.
you're all excited, but I'm not.
Somebody said it, it wasn't me.
We will establish a maximum of 5. We can establish the maximum as part of the short-term rental license. We won't define it in family. We'll just say for a short-term rental license, there can be a maximum of whatever number of people you want in the house.
What's wrong with 2 people per bedroom?
Plus one on the couch.
You got a pull-out couch, I mean,
Right.
that's where the issue is.
But generally housing it's called per bedroom, and yes, somebody can live in the living room, or sleep in the living room. But you go by bedroom.
We go by, the building code uses sleeping area, so we could go like 3 people or 2 people.
Yeah, that's what I would rather do.
I mean, who's gonna enforce that, Jerry? Come on.
I think
If it's not gonna be enforced, then why do it?
Something that we see.
Just use your building code.
So I think what we're trying to avoid is sleeping bags on the ground, right, at the end of the day, except for kids or something. But what you often see on these, on the advertisements and listings, it says it can sleep X, which means they have accommodations, meaning beds or a pull-out couch. And so I think that's what we're trying to get to here. So typically, if it's a 3-bedroom house, it usually is 8 people. You got 2 in each room and then 2 on the couch. So that's what we're trying to get to. Maybe you can come back with a...
Why don't we all grab our sleeping bags, rent a house, have a party, and discuss it there?
We used to do that on the planning commission.
I get the couch.
We got a lot done.
We would deal with 2 people per sleeping area.
But yeah, there you go. Yeah, go with that.
Yeah, and you can also create a situation that if somebody needs an exception to that, then they can, when they come in
double
for
bunk
the...
beds.
We can demonstrate that through the licensing process. The next piece here is dealing with...
This is why cities don't deal
Public
with...
safety, obviously they'll receive copies, as you previously directed, of the city's noise trash parking regulations. The issue is that we wanted to talk with you about is this question of a local contact rather. The licensee, I mean, you have to be the primary residence, but what happens if the person who is the primary residence is gone? Do they have to have a local contact? Does that contact have to be within the city, or can it be within a certain distance?
Kyle?
As I say, yes, there should be a local contact. I'm fine with even having an alternate contact in case that person reachable. But if you live on the very edge of the city, over in Centennial or Greenwood, I think a radius from the point of the house, whatever that is, 10, 20 miles, that's fine.
Well, I think we've already voted on this to a certain extent, because if you take off for 4 months for vacation.
We didn't vote.
We did not vote.
Not vote, but if you
Stop that.
take off for 4 months for vacation to Hawaii, then that's not so much a local contact.
It could be someone else.
It could be, as I was gonna say.
Does that have to be the owner?
Yeah, so I agree with what Kyle was saying, that you have to have somebody. It can't just be the owner living in Hawaii for 4 months.
And I think there's a practicality with this too. It's their home. You know, I take my dog to boarding and they need an emergency contact. I give them the person who's going to get over there fastest, who's going to make the best decisions, who's going to be the person I trust the greatest.
Never given my number, have you?
No, I have not.
She has my direct number.
So I think that there has, you know, at some point, you know, there's an assumption that these people care about their homes also. And we can overthink this thing. I think having them within a certain radius, you don't want them to have to call a friend in Salt Lake. I mean, it's got to be reasonable, but
Get there.
yeah, I mean, I know an emergency contact, you know, they're 20 minutes away. And they pick up their phone and they respond. That's what we want.
We can certainly do that. A 10-mile radius would be most of Centennial, parts of Highlands Ranch, a
Do
20-mile radius.
from the residents.
From, yeah,
Not from Littleton. Okay.
A
All right,
20-mile
that in
radius
there.
would be pretty much all of the South Metro area.
Put it in there, put it in there.
Peggy's got a question.
Yeah, so I'm trying to track what you all just said. So
Good luck.
the licensee has to live in the city.
Licensee,
The
yes.
licensee has to live in the city.
well, primary residence.
We're not,
But they have to live in the city. The licensee does.
In the house they're renting.
And then the local contact is the question of
Could be
how
anybody.
close it has to
10 mile
be.
Yeah.
And I'm saying there are very few properties that don't have somebody within an eighth of a mile.
Sure. We agree.
let them decide where they
I
are.
mean, you must know somebody that close. Even the big properties, the next door neighbor is that
All
close.
right, well, at least they got something to work with.
Yeah.
Mayor, Council, now up to our last.
one.
Okay.
Congratulations, you've done a great job. You've given us lots of info.
How long will this ordinance be?
This one may be the hard one. We're now to enforcement. Normally, our code enforcement process is complaint driven. The license revocation process will be the same as what we use for sales tax, which is we give you a notice, you have an opportunity to respond, we then have a hearing, and based on the evidence presented, we make a decision to revoke your license. Now, some cities will impose civil fines for violations, which we can certainly do. That's not something that code has right now, but lots of cities for code violations do that across the board. And so we could certainly look at developing a civil sanction system where what we do is we say, okay, much like your HOA, if you violate the rules, you get fined, and if you don't pay the fines, you don't get your license renewed.
And if they don't have a license to begin with.
And if you don't have a license to begin with, then generally what that is a criminal violation under the code, and we give you a reasonable opportunity to get a license. Or just like if you're doing business and you don't have a sales tax license, if you don't get the sales tax license within a reasonable time, we actually will prosecute you in municipal court.
Karina?
So I think I heard.
Don't count on it.
Okay, so I'll just say where I stand on this. I think we should impose a fine upfront and known that if there is a disturbance of the peace, however that needs to be defined, that they already know when they're putting up their short-term rental for rent, that there is a risk that they may be charged $500 or $1,000. So they may, that may drive the decision of who they're renting to. So I want to stop the problem, or at least give them a point of caution or concern before it becomes a problem. So that's why I think a defined fine for,
Fine.
it's fine.
Mayor, Council.
I would.
I'm fine with that.
Based on, I'm fine with that too. One of the things that, when I say to add Airbnbs or, yes, whatever.
Fine?
The contract you sign, the agreement you make with the person who owns the home will typically state in there, if you break any of these rules that they have, and all their rules are the city's rules plus more. If you break any of those, you will be fined, or we will deduct an additional $500 or whatever, 100, because they've got your credit card, they hold that because they're charging you while you're there. So typically the problem is the people that are renting that behave poorly. So if you've got the person who owns the home enforcing that the people that are renting are the ones that, that their behavior can be penalized, then behaviors start to change and people behave better. I mean, most often they say you cannot have anybody in this house other than the ones you have listed and told us will be here. And if you do, boom, boom, boom. So I agree. Because those are the things they can pass on to their renters to make it more rigid for them.
So is it almost double jeopardy though? Is it, they're gonna charge them and then the city's gonna come behind and then fine them also?
No,
Okay.
no, it's like retail.
Right.
User will.
What normally would happen here with the civil sanctions is, it's kind of like if you rent a car, they would tell you, by the way, if you get parking tickets or traffic tickets that go against the registration of the car, we reserve the right to deduct those from your credit card. This would be the same thing. I get sanctioned by the city for your misconduct in my short-term rental, I'm going to simply either deduct it or sue you or whatever to recover my costs. And we will incorporate a system of civil sanctions here. This is going to be something new for this city, so and we will work through this. And I would just say, because it's new, amounts that might be really, really punitive, I would ask the council to consider sort of, we're going to have to wait and get our feet wet with this, and so I would recommend not being as punitive as you might think. Well, maybe we should have the civil sanction be $1,000. I would maybe think more like about $250 or whatever, just because.
Just make it hurt. It needs to hurt.
We'll make it then.
Not $20.
Yeah. Again, I want to go back to the point that Airbnbs aren't all bad. I mean, it's like if cell phone companies, if we responded, we're not going to have any cell phone companies because somebody complains about AT&T and Verizon, none of us would have cell phones. Airbnbs, they operate all the time quietly. And there's rating systems too for people that it's like Uber or Lyft. There's rating systems for where you rent as well as who rented from you. So there's a lot of systems in here. If you're not familiar with them, they're there.
Well, and the better that the operator is, the more that they can charge because people want to have a type of good quality operator.
And
So-
people won't rent to you if you're bad.
Enforcement, we're not done with that.
Jerry?
So we will basically deal with creating a system of civil sanctions that will be imposed against the license and will have to be addressed as part of the license renewal. And so we will incorporate that.
Carol?
But let's say that there is a problem, and where does the complainant go?
The normal process that we would have for code items would be if it's during regular business hours, they would make a complaint to code enforcement. If it's not, they would call police dispatch. If it's non-emergent, and this gets in, I don't want to spend a whole lot of time talking about priorities of calls.
No, that's not the point.
But the point is that if it's non-emergent, police would normally refer it to code enforcement to be addressed during the next business day. If it's something that is emergent, say for example, there is a loud party and there is crowds spilling out into the outside or whatever that constitutes disturbing of the peace,
I remember those
then
days.
that becomes treated as a higher priority call. Now, the thing I want to say is that it won't be treated as what we call a priority one call. Priority one calls are felonies and serious crimes. This would be treated as a priority two call. And the reason is that we have to have adequate response times for those high priority calls.
We know that.
Can we have a complaint hotline or a form on the website for this? this, you know? Where you're talking about tracking the complaints rather than,
What I'm talking about, and these are the two situations that I heard about this spring that helped get us to where we are now, is it's 11 o'clock at night, I need my kids to go to sleep, there's another party next door. They're cussing, they're throwing beer bottles, and so on. And I don't like my kids to be exposed to that. Something needs to be done right then, not tomorrow or Monday morning. Something really does need to be done right then, especially if it happens Friday night and then Saturday night. I understand that the police have emergencies to deal with. Is there a way that we can creatively think of a way to deal with this kind of situation other than, don't worry, ma'am, we have other things we have to take care of, have a good night?
Karina?
Wouldn't this happen at a graduation party in my house? My kids are only middle school, but that, again, I think that it can happen in a short-term rental, it can happen in a home, and it can happen as an annual rental, it can happen in any situation, and I don't know that this requires different treatment. Again, it's the act, not the condition.
But there's the repetition.
right.
Well, I
and
think
then
that
comes
is
into-
where having the enforcement thing, where then they become a nuisance house, their license gets revoked.
Revoked.
So they can no longer operate.
So that night that is happening, that neighbor is SOL.
Except that they made the first complaint.
For the first
Except that they
complaint,
made
for the
the first
third,
The first complaint can be a $250 fine.
Hopefully
And
the-
then the next time, it's either can be another fine or they lose their permit or whatever. So I think,
in light of enforcement, who is the contact person? What are they there for?
It's,
That said, he wants to give out your personal cell phone to everyone to contact, and
So the person that needs to be within 10 miles
So that
of
person, I would think-
what are they there for?
I would think that, if it was me, I would drive over to that house and kick everybody out and say,
But somebody would have to contact you. And the way we are right now, what happens is the neighbor has the complaint, they call the non-emergency number, the non-emergency number says, we don't have anyone who can deal with this tonight.
police maybe have those numbers?
right, would they? So the
You know, you're gonna
police
get-
fire those numbers.
have
to be filed
access to
with
the
city.
owner or the contact person.
Yeah, if I may, let me step in. I think, I don't think the police dispatch is gonna be in a position to have a database to call, contact people. So if the expectation of council is to have some kind of process beyond dispatch, then that's just gonna be a staffing resource. That's gonna be something we do not have in place. So if you, again, want the response immediately, then that's gonna be more staff.
I've had lots of friends go to parties where
Karina.
cops have shown up and broken up the party.
Yeah.
So it does
Karina.
happen. I've never.
Karina,
Or the part of the condition of the contact person or the owner has to be distributed to your immediate neighbors.
Exactly. Yes.
There you go.
Is there any reason why we couldn't or shouldn't do that?
Probably look at Steve for that answer.
That's a legal answer, maybe.
Yeah, I
He's gonna
think,
ask how many people in the family.
All right, think about that. Think about that.
Mayor, Council, let me deal with that. I think we can find a way to deal with what Councilmember Elrod just suggested, because that is public record, and I think we can figure out a way to deal with that.
yeah, I just think there's an operational concern there, to be
Yeah.
honest with you. Because
What
then
concern?
an operational concern, then you're relying upon kind of the good faith of the existing neighbors. And then, so the relationship may not be good between the neighbor and the one with the Airbnb, for example. And so then you're gonna have to make some judgment about whether or not the calls are legit. And so that would be my concern with having to rely upon a system like that.
We'll put
And
together.
again, the onus is on the owner and the person that has a short-term rental to have a good relationship. Yes, that some of that can happen. I'm hearing you. But I feel, first, it is public record, both the owner of the property, and if they're getting a license, I believe that's public record as well. So if I was an owner of a short-term rental, and we actually heard this from a lot of people in a lot of citizens that came forward that have short-term rentals, all their neighbors know. And they make
I think what you're making is a
themselves
good idea, but Mark's saying, what if one of your neighbors really doesn't like you, and anytime there's a rental, regardless, calls and says.
Well, they're calling the contact, and then the contact has to either deal with that complaint from the neighbor. If it escalates, it'll end up at the police anyway.
It's not the neighbor's job to do enforcement. I mean, and at the end of the day, if there's a bad rental and people are misbehaving, it's 11 o'clock at night, and the cops can't get there because we've got a pile up on Santa Fe and a robbery somewhere else. They've turned in the complaint, we've got the complaint, and we have to deal with it the next day, and sadly, those neighbors have to deal with that noise that night. But what we can put in place will stop that from continuing to happen.
What's the contact person for them? If not, truly, it's not a rhetorical question. Why do we have the contact person?
Is that something you said you're gonna work on?
We can reach them.
Maybe come back.
So we can let them know there was a complaint.
Say there's
Because if
a
the
hike-
homeowners are in Europe for the summer and they've rented it out, we need someone local, so.
Yeah, for code of
What are
conduct.
they gonna do?
Water heater burst.
Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, it's not
We
necessarily
need to get
for,
in the house, you know,
Not a behavior thing, okay.
yeah.
Okay.
And so, finally with enforcement, what we would, most cities on short-term rentals use an entity like Host Compliance, which does the initial online management of these. And so, I would expect, this is really more of an administrative decision than a council decision, but we would incorporate something like that within the enforcement process, just to make it more efficient. And with that, that covers all of our slides.
Don't
except
quit
for-
that.
quick question, and I hope this
We
can be
don't
a
wrap
very short answer. How much do those services cost?
I believe that we looked at it was about $5,000, Jocelyn, for a year.
How much?
So I just want that to be put into the thought process for the fees.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Oh, one of those questions.
And so, getting back to the very beginning, we're asking now, council, would you like us to continue the process to bring this back to you for adoption prior to the end of the extended moratorium?
Yes.
Thank you.
Rena has a question, Peggy does too.
I have some language comments like,
Email.
for example, yes, and that's what I'm going to recommend. I just want to make sure you guys are okay with me taking this approach. For example, page 4, line 32, it talks about no more than 10% of the guests reside for a period of more than 30 days. Why? Why is it 10%? Why is it not? Why is it 5%? So why, some of this language feels like we're just being too prescriptive. In another case, we say rooms greater than 400 square feet. Well, we have tiny houses that are 400 square feet. So those are some of the comments, and you
I'd
guys
be happy to work with you,
you
Councilman.
guys are okay with me doing that?
And Mayor, I thought we had 2 items in the parking lot. Did we get rid of those?
We had license holders.
Peggy has a question, real quick, please.
So is it possible to have some kind of deposit when something is rented that will cover some of the cost of enforcement so that if a problem occurs, you forfeit that deposit?
I think that was the discussion we had earlier, where I think if, depending on the amount of the civil penalties, that could be then added to how the vacation rental kind of manages their application to the prospective renters. So they could show specifically on the application form then that you have to have a deposit for X amount of money to cover those civil penalties in case they violate that. I think that's what
Peggy, can I try rephrasing what you said?
Well, let me make sure I said what I think I said.
I think I heard you, I think.
So if you have to actually have money on the table right from the get-go, the person renting, the homeowner who's doing this puts money out. They've got a vested interest to make sure the neighbor or somebody, if there's a problem beginning to emerge, that gets dealt with right now.
I think she's talking about with the city having a very high initial fee, like what Durango was $750. I wonder if that was, and upon you get rid of your license, we return that $750.
Oh, I see.
From the city.
Or $500.
Yeah. Is that what you're saying to the city?
No, you want to rent my property.
Okay,
You're the one renting, and I've
Okay.
got the property. You're gonna have to, as part of something.
Right.
It's like, what do you call, like a surety kind of thing, that you're gonna behave.
that's something Airbnb and VRBO do already.
They already
That's,
do
that's
that.
their private contract.
But is it enough?
That's not our contract.
I mean,
It's not our problem.
no, but, so if they don't do it, is there a way for us to do it? And then,
In some ways, the fact that we're imposing a fee almost incentivizes them to put it into their contract, because otherwise they're gonna have to eat it all themselves and they can't push it down to the renter.
I mean, I'm not thinking to rent my house at all. Number one, nobody's gonna find it big enough to use, but, so, if you all feel this is.
I'm pretty confident that through the civil penalty approach here, that the owners of these vacation rentals will push that fee down in every single application. I think if they don't, it's a very poor business decision on their part.
Well, and they are responsible for it, so we
That's
will
right.
come after them.
That's right.
So if they want to push it on, they can.
That's right.
Okay, so parking lot, we have the current licensees must become compliant by 1/1/2020.
I like that date.
Okay,
Seems pretty far out to me.
It seems way too far out to me, too.
Wait,
No?
too far?
Too far.
We've just,
Karina,
right now, we're moving forward with a primary residence, correct? Okay. And there were a number of citizens, and I'm not sure how many of these 9 licenses already were not. It's not their primary residence, their second home. It might have been their childhood home or something else. And essentially, you're asking them a year from now to either sell the home, move into the home, or turn it into an annual rental. And I think, given the real estate market, I think that is, I think that's quite unfair, to be quite honest with
Maybe
you.
excruciating circumstances we could recognize.
Yeah, but I don't,
There's 9 circumstances.
I think that's
Carol.
long.
How about we allow those existing to apply for a variance?
Well, this is not a use, so we normally would not have a variance. What council might
whatever
do
the word is.
is that we could just say it for these entities that are not primary residents. We could just give a longer period. If council felt that because of the primary residence that is so onerous, you could certainly go 1/1/21 versus 1/1/20.
how many of them are there? We only have 10 people that have done permits.
There's quite a few of them that are not primary.
How many is quite a few?
Not knowing exactly, I would say of the 9,
That have licenses?
Have licenses.
yeah, I know at least 4.
So we can identify them, and I think that by being able to identify them, we work with them.
Yeah, they can apply for something, yeah.
Yeah, because if there are other people that are doing the Airbnbs and they've never applied for a license,
They don't
then,
But again, our code was so I think there's 2 pieces here. So one, if it's specific to those that have a license now, I think, and given that we have not had any complaints with them, we really need to be lenient in that process, and I'm open to a recommendation. Like I said, a year is too short, and I would even suggest indefinitely, unless there's a reason that they violate everything and we just shut them down. And then, so that's my position on that one. The second one is people that have not gotten a license. I am certain many of those people didn't even know how to interpret our code one way or another, right? So they don't even know that they're doing something wrong or even doing something right. Even in those cases, I think 2020 is too short.
Kyle,
I agree with Karina on the first part. For the people that did get the licenses, they can be grandfathered in. People that were operating without a license, they need to get a license there. I don't see any reason to give them any grandfathering to continue to operate out of
I
them.
agree.
I agree.
So for the 9 that do, I don't know, when I said 1 year I was good with, depending on how else we went, I think extending it 2 or 3 years might be appropriate in those 9 circumstances.
Well, I think, let's do this. Let's ask staff to reach out to them and find out what their situation is. Some of them may just say, okay, well, I won't do it anymore. or whatever, and we'll have to deal with them on an individual basis, and I think we just let staff administratively handle that.
I think we can create the structure and a code to do that.
Okay, and then you'll need to, the individual work that you're gonna do with them, just take care of that.
We can create that structure.
Yeah, we don't need,
Can
we don't
I,
need to
can
hear
I do
about it.
one more ask? For the ones that aren't licensed, we are asking them to come into compliance by January of 2020. So that really means one year, the real estate market is hot in the summer, so they only have like one summer to sell it. I'd like to suggest to at least give them a two-year cycle.
Let's see what they reach out to them.
She's talking about the other one, okay. All right, so just a minute. Kyle, just a minute. So Karina would like us to extend the 1/1/2020 longer for people who did not apply for permits and need to come into compliance. So the decision, or the nod here is if you want to keep people, current licensees must become compliant by 1/1/2020.
No, not the current licensees, the non-licensees.
Non-licensees, compliant by January 1st, 2020. Gives them a year plus to do that.
My
Like
ask
them
is
to have 2 years.
2021.
I say too long. I say, why not get them compliant? Starting.
So you actually
That would
think
be 6
2020 is
weeks.
too long.
You were saying by January 1st, 2019 to
They
everyone?
have to come and fill out some paperwork. It doesn't
No,
cost them a
they
thing.
have to potentially turn their home into a primary
Yeah.
residence or an annual rental or sell it.
Wait a minute here, I'm
Okay.
confused here, because I think if, for the 9, that's clear that you're considering, multiple years. For those who have not obtained a business license, are you suggesting that somehow those who have Airbnbs or whatever now be allowed some time for transition?
January of
Wow,
2021.
that is not the purpose of this ordinance.
No.
We're asking for a new layer here that I don't think staff ever anticipated the council would ask for.
Well, it's not done.
Because that's a whole nother year of basically non-compliance for anyone that wants to do it. Can
Yeah,
get
there's no way for us, there's no way for us to understand what that number is of total people out there. The purpose of this ordinance is when you pass it the next day after second reading, those who do not have a business license all have to comply with the
Exactly,
ordinance.
right. That's what
You don't have an inventory of who was operating
No,
without a license.
I don't think there's an effective way for us to even manage that.
Not accurate.
No, I don't.
Yeah.
If people, so we've got some people who don't have this now, and you say the very next day they have to be.
After the second reading, the passing of the ordinance is published, it becomes the law.
So if they maybe have already got people coming in 3 days to use their place, they have to cancel that?
They have to come within compliance of the law.
They'll have plenty of warning.
Yes.
I mean, we'll pass it, and it doesn't, this comes back to us in December. Right.
And Mayor, Council, like any zoning change, like any code, it becomes immediately effective. But we will certainly be working with people. This isn't going to be where the city is going to suddenly send in code enforcement.
No.
We work with people, and if somebody said, gee, I didn't know I had to be licensed, we would say, okay, you need to get in and get licensed. We work with people, and this would be no exception. We as staff, we know how to do this, and Jocelyn's staff, code enforcement, myself, we would all be working, city manager's office, we'd all be working with people to implement this in a methodical, organized way. This isn't gonna be,
Well, I'm not understanding. It's almost like I'm going to tell the police officer, I didn't realize that law existed. I mean, that doesn't exactly make sense. So it seems to me, if we pass something and we say it goes into effect at a certain time, that's when it should go into effect. So the real issue is how the time that we want it to go into effect after we've passed it.
You could
extend
extend the effective date. That's, if you wanted to do that, like 30 days or whatever, the city could certainly post that and do our best to kind of push that information out.
And we've got
do
lots,
that.
we've got lots of media
Sure.
that we can do that. And I mean, I'd say by the beginning of the next Littleton report? Because everybody will get that.
Just kind of put yourself, guys, put
Create
yourself.
that.
I mean, but there has to be some
All right, so at this point, when we vote on this, it's on December 18th, I think it is,
The next day it becomes.
and the next day it becomes law.
That's right.
So if we want to, so there's two options there. One, we say this is effective March 1st, for example,
To do that.
or we keep it at, or a date to be determined, or we keep it as that, and then as people come in to get into compliance, if they need some extra assistance or a little extension or something like
Staff
that.
can deal with
staff
that.
deals with it.
We can deal with that administrative.
This is assuming it gets passed in the first place.
Yeah.
Correct.
So unless there's questions or comments about that, let's do a nod. Are you okay with, let's say March 1st, 2019,
I like effective
effective immediately?
immediately, and
Okay.
they'll take care of the.
I'm effective immediately.
Okay. Okay. I'm effective immediately, that's 4.
Well, there.
All right.
Mayor, council, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going.
We don't want to see you back here again with this one.
I don't want to be back here again with short-term rentals. I want to come to a first read.
Yes.
Please.
I think you said it, to a good point, is that, you
Oh, it's
know,
going up before.
this is an ongoing process, and you expect to probably be back in a year.
I expect we'll be back talking about it in a year. Every other city has, and I don't see
Dynamic.
any exception.
Zoning.
Zoning.
You guys
Oh, that's a
want
short
to take a quick break?
This is yours.
Keep going.
I'm good.
I've been in the
All right.
sandwich for tonight.
All right, we're moving on. No break.
I don't know how much time council intends to spend on this, but, you know, if, you may want to, it's really up to the council to decide. If it's too late here, we can push this off. We do have intended kind of an ordinance here to officially accept this, but, you know, we've waited obviously a long time.
Well, let's get started.
Yeah, I'm okay with it.
And if it's gonna go upside down in the ditch, similar to what we just,
I can see this going upside down. All right.
then we'll give it till 9:15 and then we'll cut
Yeah,
it.
let's just see where we're going.
I think you
Pull it up. 3-5 now, Jerry.
Yes.
Yeah, let's go ahead.
Thank you very much.
What was 3? Wait.
What's that?
What were you doing 3-4?
I know, what were
Oh, it
you?
was 3-4, now it's 3-5.
Oh, the score.
Oh, the game.
Red Sox.
Oh, the Sox are up.
Game.
Okay, all right. That's what you're doing.
Top of the 7th.
Hey, I'm focused on this, man.
3-5.
3.
Easily distracted.
What inning?
Top of the 7th.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, it's not like we're gonna change any of it
I think I have.
tonight.
No, you can't.
Let's start.
I know.
Slack.
Just like you.
Can we just explain that?
So
Thank you.
this is coming before you at, a future meeting, and we just wanted to quickly go over it. This is the updated zoning map for Littleton. We've spent the last about 9 to 10 months working with planning staff and our GIS staff to create this map. We feel it's pretty exciting. It's a new updated version. If you haven't checked it out online, we also have it online. And Planning Commission formally looked at it last night. They are recommending City Council adopt it, and it does come to you in November, tentatively. So no changes to the existing zone districts, no change in the individual properties. It matches, we have both now a static map and our online interactive version. And we're very excited about it. Excited to share it with you this evening. One thing of note, we're very proud of how much time, well, not the time, but just the fact that we have a lot of different residential districts. And we did try to stick true to in GIS, they have like standard mapping colors for zone districts, so we stuck to that. It did take a while to get the residential yellow differentiated on the map, but it came out great. And so it's, as you know, it's a foundational element of our city code and our land use. And we've definitely gotten a lot of input from community members on the online version. One thing we're working with on the online version is you can type in an address and it'll bring up a bunch of different information about that property, including like the school district, your council district, and it will tell you the zoning, and if it's straight zoning, it will even link you to, like say it's R1, it'll link you to that section of our zoning code. Other thing we're working on, just so you guys know, in process is linking with the PD information. That's just going to take a bit longer because we've got to, create the back end of it and get all the files organized and in the appropriate location. But we feel that we've definitely seen an increase in customer service from the department as far as number of people calling in. We can refer them to this map, and like I said, so far we've just gotten nothing but great positive feedback.
So what are we lesson? I mean, they're using it, it's online.
Yeah.
What are we doing?
You are going to be adopting Littleton's official zoning map, and it will be coming forward to you here.
And so what changes could we make?
You cannot make any.
So I'm just trying to get.
Well, that's easy, Dominic, thank you.
You're patting Justin on the back and saying good
Nice
job.
job. Good girl.
Just the use of colors.
Yes.
I might recommend a different shade of.
Trying to get it into a structure of, so having you guys adopt it officially will just create that operational excellence that the department's moving towards and that we're really focused around. And it will then create that structure so when applications come before you in the future for rezoning of some capacity, then it'll be tied to officially, making an amendment to this map.
That's the point.
That's the critical point.
That's the very
Say that again.
Go ahead, say that again.
So by you adopting this, that creates our baseline, and then as future rezoning applications come before you, that will be very specific and very intentional, saying that we will be updating this official zoning map.
And if I may, let me give a little bit background on how this got created. So this has not been updated in several years. So the planning staff, the GIS staff, actually went to the city clerk's records and took all of the past council actions on zoning and took the legal descriptions and actually plotted them on this map. So that's why it's an official zoning map. It's based on the council's official action by legal description. And so sorting that out over the last 9 months, quite honestly, has been a monumental task. So now, in the future, you will see very specific language in zoning approvals that if you make the change, the zoning change, for example, it will reference back and a modification to this official map.
And all of those are attached to each individual parcel within Littleton.
That's
Those
right.
are the
That's
other
another
piece.
piece.
Karina?
I have a question and a comment.
Okay.
What if there's an error?
Well, based on the work that we've done, again, going through all the records and piecing them together by a legal description, we believe there are no errors.
What if there is an error?
Who would discover the error?
I don't know, a citizen, maybe the property owner who did the rezoning.
The mayor.
I'm just saying, what if?
And-
Again, it was a human exercise.
I've been down this road 3 times in 3 different jurisdictions. If we have an error, what we would do is we will be bringing to you a zoning case to correct that error and to have the map reflect the proper zoning.
I think it's highly unlikely just based on the 9 months of research.
And the comment is, because it's exactly what you were just saying, given that we as council are saying this is correct and accurate and we adopt it and formally adopt it, for us to be able to say that not just in blind faith, as you bring this forward to us, if you can outline all of the steps and processes to say, as a result of this diligence and process and internal control procedures, blah, 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 then at least you have that assurance.
Be happy to do that. There is a great story behind this by the staff. There really is.
There's a, oh geez, leave me hanging.
Even more reason to showcase that.
Oh,
Yeah.
Okay.
I won't be able to sleep tonight now.
Council, any questions or comments or concerns? Nicely done. Good job.
Great,
Thank
good
you.
job. All right.
I'm gonna like replicate it and make it wallpaper and decorate my living room.
We're adjourned.
Punch you out, that you made.
10 o'clock?